Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our first public meeting of the new year, Thursday, January 11th. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So are there any public announcements from the commissioners or staff? Seeing none, are there any public comments on non-agenda items? And we have three public hearings on our agenda today, so this would be your opportunity if there's anything else you want to bring up. Okay, moving right along, our current claims list received as of December 8, 2017 to January 5th, 2018, total $6,052,000
It's really hard, isn't it?
I don't have this much in my bank account. What can I say? $6,052,539.46. Okay. We have three public hearings today. The first is a family transfer, followed by Public Works manual revision, followed by the B&M Zoo subdivision. I'll go ahead and open up the public hearing on the, forgive me if I slaughter your name, Klusowicz? Family transfer. Casey, do we have a staff report?
Indeed. Casey Drayton, planner for Missoula County Community and Planning Services, here to present the Klusowicz Family Transfer Staff Report. This family transfer request is located off of the Frenchtown Frontage Road, just northwest of the Huson exit with Interstate 90. The property currently stands at just under 70 acres in size. Looking at the parcel, you can see it's currently vacant. There is one road that runs up the east side, Conniption Road. Other than that, access is provided by the Frenchtown Frontage Road. It appears that the use on the tract is currently primarily agricultural, haying operation of some sort. Other than that, there doesn't appear to be any structures on the property. The property is unzoned and falls within the 2002 Regional Land Use Guide plan area. The land use designations for the property, the primary portion of the property that's used for the agricultural use currently is designated as open and resource. The area of the property up at the northeast corner is designated as residential at a recommended density of 1 dwelling unit per 10 acres. That area that's up there in that 1 dwelling unit per 10 acres is about 10.5 acres in size with some rough measurements. The open and resource land use designation focused to preserve open and resources with recommended residential density of about 1 dwelling unit per 40 acres. So a fairly open field down there in that open and resource designation. That information is noted in the staff analysis as well as a memo that was provided to you on January 8th, 2018, going over some of the general evasion criteria. In addition, the staff analysis does generally note that this property is within the Huson Activity Center. The Huson Activity Center or Activity Circle you can see on this slide here is a general area around the Huson exit. The circle is designed to be an area where activity should occur within the Huson area. If you look at the 2002 Regional Land Use Plan, these activity circles are noted fairly generally, just stating that any development that's to occur should occur within this area, just based on the proximity to transportation and other services in the area. It recommends a density of up to 2 dwelling units per acre with a mix of commercial. This is sort of an alternate land use designation as opposed to what we just saw on the previous slide with the open and resource and residential 1 per 10. Both of these land use designations apply. There's not necessarily one that trumps the other. The activity center has sort of a loose interpretation with it, so we would still look to the overarching open and resource and 1 per 10 designation when taking a look at the comprehensive plan recommendations for this property. And I'd be happy to answer questions further about maybe some cases as well where that's played out in the past where you do have kind of a contradictory land use designation. The proposal for the family transfer is to create and transfer 5 new parcels. This would result in 6 total tracts on the property. Josh and Lauren Klusowicz would retain tract 6 all the way to the west side of the property. This is just over 32 acres. The other 5 tracts, 3 of which would go to sons or daughters of the Klusowiczes, and 1 tract would go to each of their mothers, as noted in the table below. That table was cut out of the exemption affidavit that was provided to us by the applicant and their representative. So we can see overall we have a mix of tracts ranging from 32 acres down to just over 2 acres. So a pretty good variety in size of tracts there. There's no real consistency across the board on them. As mentioned, access is provided either off that Conniption Road or off the Frenchtown Frontage Road. It appears tracks 1, 2, and 3 would use a shared access easement. I believe that's what the dashed line is indicating down there at the southern boundary. And then tracks 4 and 6 would use some sort of a shared access approach, all of which would require approach permits from Public Works. Just to note generally, some of the rebuttable presumptions and evasion criteria that go with a family transfer request. On a general scale, the purpose of exemptions is to accommodate an exceptional circumstance. It shouldn't just be used to divide land for the purpose of subdividing. As mentioned in subdivision regulations section 8.1, there are, like I said, general evasion criteria and specific rebuttable presumptions to family transfer to guide the decision making in the family transfer process. Each of these is detailed either in the staff analysis or the memorandum provided to you on January 8th. Going through the rebuttable presumption specific to family transfers, the only criteria that was really triggered is the fact that one of these parcels is going to a minor child. There wasn't any information on a trust being set up to ensure that that child is actually the intended recipient. And looking into the general evasion criteria, some of the triggers that you might say would indicate evasion. One of which is the fact that the property was transferred to the claimant within the past 2 years. Looks like the Josh and Lauren Klusowicz Family Trust received the property back in April of 2016. The Family Trust then transferred it into their individual names back in October of 2017. In addition to that, the claimant has used a boundary line relocation. It's not directly related to this parcel. It was at an off-site location. The division would result in 6 or more tracts, each less than 160 acres, divided from the original tract. So this would be 5 additional tracts of record created through this family transfer. It is incompatible in one sense with the growth policy, that it's not compatible with the open and resource land use designation and that 1/10 recommendation. We would have a little denser field than you would get with that growth policy recommendation. And another one is whether or not this exemption is in violation of statutes, case law, administrative rules, or Attorney General opinions. It's been noted that Attorney General opinion fairly closely mirrors Section 8.1 of the subdivision regulations, that exemptions are to be construed narrowly to accommodate exceptional circumstances. There hasn't necessarily been an exceptional circumstance noted with this application. However, it does appear to be a pretty straightforward use of the family transfer to immediate family members. And the last evasion criteria that would be triggered looking into this request would be whether or not this exemption would cause significant impacts relative to subdivision review criteria that would likely lead to the imposition of significant conditions of approval or denial if a subdivision proposal was brought forward. It would be anticipated that there would be a large slate of conditions that would come with this to mitigate impacts if this was to come forward as a subdivision. Looking overall between the rebuttable presumptions and the evasion criteria, staff has found that this seems to be a fairly appropriate use of the family transfer exemption based solely on those criteria. And with that, staff is recommending that the request by Josh and Lauren Klusowicz to utilize the exemption to create and transfer 5 parcels to immediate family be approved. And before I conclude the staff report, we do have a handful of questions here for one of the claimants, in this case, Josh or Lauren Klusowicz, if you'd like to come forward.
And if you could state your name on the microphone for the record, that would be great.
Yeah, Josh Klusowicz.
And is the green light on that microphone? Go ahead and hit that button there. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Did you buy the property with the intent of dividing it?
No,
Do you or your transferees intend to transfer the property within the next year?
no,
Have you talked to anyone at the county about going through subdivision review?
no.
And we have two different sets of questions here. The first set pertains to recipients that are not minors. So 4 of the 5 to-be transfer tracts, will those properties be developed?
What do you mean by developed? As far as
Residential development, single-family home?
yeah, single family.
Will the recipient of the property be residing on that property?
Most likely, yes.
Okay, now for the tract that's going to the minor, do you have a trust established for the child to hold the property?
I do.
And who is the trustee of the trust? Who controls it?
I will be I have the paper on it, if you want a copy of it.
Okay.
But I would be the one in charge.
Okay. And
Or
if,
Lauren, my wife.
okay, and then if the property is sold, will the money be held in trust?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Those are all the questions, and that's the conclusion of my report.
Okay, thank you. Either Mr. or Mrs. Klusowicz or your representative, is there anything else you want to add at this time?
No, I just brought the ones that were going to be involved with it here, just so they, you knew that it was them.
Okay, thank you.
And if you want a copy of the trust, I've got that too, if you need it.
Yeah, if you could get that to Casey maybe later. Okay, this is a public hearing. So is there any public comment on the proposed family transfer?
Oh, is that the original?
Okay, seeing none, I will close the public hearing and open up to questions or discussion among the commissioners.
So I guess being that this does create 6 lots out of 1 lot, which is a general evasion criteria for subdivision, this appears to be a subdivision on the face of it. And so I don't know if I have a question other than why are you not going through the subdivision process? Because if this had to go through the subdivision process, it would be a major subdivision and would likely be subject to several conditions. If we allow a family transfer, which is an exemption, we can't do any of that review criteria that would be necessary to make sure a subdivision protected public health and safety. And so I'm curious why you're not going through the subdivision process for this, or why you think you shouldn't have to go through the subdivision process.
Come on up, yeah.
Stephen Abnett with Eli and Associates. And Josh is a client of mine, has been for 3 years or so. And he contacted me about this property, told me what he wanted to do, and that was to give parcels to his kids and his mother and Lauren's mother. And so when he brought this up, and I'm questioning him, it all indicates family transfer, not a subdivision. If he'd have told me that he was wanting to divide this property and put it on the market and just to generate income, then I would have said subdivision. So I'm the one that made the determination to go with floodplain exemption, family transfer exemption.
Thank you. I guess while you're at the mic, could you say a few words about the configuration of the lots?
Sure. Yeah, Josh wanted to put all the lots in one parcel of the field so that he could continue to farm the remainder. And so the frontage road is great access, and so that's why each of them have frontage on the frontage road. The conniption is a really steep bank, and it's not physically possible to access.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Inapit. I have an additional question. You can go ahead and have a seat. Thank you. Casey, you'd mentioned earlier that you might have something else to share in terms of situations where you have seemingly two conflicting land use designations. Is there anything else you want to elaborate there?
I would just say that the specifics, there's a specific case where it has come up in the past, and the way it was looked at was the fact that, yes, you do have a designation that calls for something as far as one dwelling unit per 40 acres, but then you also have kind of a general description that this is where development should occur up to 2 dwelling units per acre. It was looked at totally separate in that case, saying that, yes, the proposal was compliant with one. No, it was not necessarily compliant with the other. However, because it is just the comprehensive plan land use recommendation, at that point, the commission moved forward with the request and proceeded on to address other review criteria. There wasn't a decision based solely on that land use designation. They found that there was compliance with it on some scale, but not necessarily the other.
Thank you. Commissioner Kerners, you have a question?
Casey, could you go back to the slide that showed the activity circle? So it just seems funny to me that, is not everything showing here? Because why is there no designation over all those houses to the, I guess, to the east?
That, anything that doesn't have a, like the 1 dwelling per 10 or 1 per 5 down to the south would be open and resource. And that includes all the area within the activity circle that doesn't have that additional designation over top of it. So that open and resource is the 1 per 40 general recommendation.
So do we know did all those houses come in there after? I mean, it looks to me like
Well-
we've got the circle in the wrong place because all the housing is over to the
Yeah,
east.
I couldn't speak to exactly when each of those residences was built. But, depending on the means in which those properties were created, if it went through subdivision, certainly the comprehensive plan would have been contemplated pretty heavily. If they came through for an exemption long ago, it may not have been, just because at that point in time, they weren't necessarily looking too heavily at the comprehensive plan land use designation.
And does the Frenchtown Activity Circle touch this one, maybe? It might be in the Frenchtown Circle.
It doesn't actually touch. It'd be separate. It would show up here if it was in this screenshot, but it's just further over to the east.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little conflicted on this one in that the land use designations and what is proposed are so far at variance. They do not appear in substantial compliance. Yet at the same time, apparently, a subdivision was approved at some point immediately to the west, it looks like, and those lots appear relatively smallish and on par with what's being proposed in this family transfer. Yeah, Commissioner Curtis.
Yes, I have a question for either Mr. or Mrs. Klusowicz, if you'd like, if you could
Yeah, if you could come up
to the-
tonight, please.
So one of the questions that we ask folks is whether or not you're developers, and you're not. So could you just tell me what do you folks do for a living?
Yeah, I ranch for a living.
That's what I thought, because I Googled you, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. No.
But, so to me, it looks like a family that, so farmers need houses and farms need farmers. So I see this as a way for their family, because you have some other properties in the area, right, that you do farm?
Yes, we farm 2,000 acres. So this is the best piece to be able to give the kids. A lot of it we lease in those areas, but this is the best one to keep it in the family so they have something down the line for them. That's why I did it.
Okay. That's what we usually find when someone who's a farmer, rancher, picks the spot that'd be the best to put the houses. It's the property that's the least productive for the farm. So I just wanted that on the record. Thank
Okay.
you.
And I will say, I definitely appreciate what appears to be about 50% of the parcel being reserved for agricultural use. So I think that's commendable in your proposal. Additional discussion or questions from the commission? Anyone care to make a motion?
I would move that the Board of County Commissioners approve the request for family transfers as presented by the Klusowicz family, as there does not appear to be an invasion of subdivision.
That motion's in order. Is there a second? I'll second it. Any additional discussion on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, that motion carries. Thank you. Okay, our second public hearing is on the Public Works Manual Revision. This is a continuation of a public hearing that we opened, was it back in November? How time flies, November 30th. So to start off, Eric Dixon, would you like to give us a little update on, maybe for those who have not been following this, exactly what it is that we're contemplating today, and then also any proposed changes that might have come about following the last time we had this discussion?
Thank you. Eric Dixon for Public Works. And actually, the last hearing that was scheduled, we didn't actually make it to presenting anything. That was the Lindbergh Lake long round of discussion. So I guess technically this has not been presented yet in a public forum.
Okay, then
So this
we're
is-
starting fresh.
this is the-
We
this is
will
the first
consider
time.
this an opening of the public hearing then. Go ahead.
So we've been contemplating the need for revisions to the manual for quite a while and have been working on them. And so we developed our revisions, and in November, we made those revisions available to the public. Let me see if I can try to summarize how we presented everything. We did it in a couple different manners. One, made these side-by-side comparisons available. We had a lot of simple editing changes, some formatting changes, and then we did also have some what turned into be larger organizational changes. Really didn't change the content. Our intent was not to increase or make any procedures more difficult. A lot of the revisions were based on what we have seen to be the actual practice since the last time that the manual was revised, which was in 2010. So the changes that we were trying to reflect or trying to make would reflect what the actual practice for a lot of the issues were. What we had in place since 2010 through a matter of practice have just changed, whether it's simple things like road naming and addressing, because since 2010, our GIS department has expanded greatly, and they've taken over that role. And so the references in the Public Works Manual were still to the Public Works Department doing a lot of those activities. So we just wanted to capture a lot of the changes that have been in place since then. And it was difficult for me to try to show how a lot of those changes were made. Personally, I guess just a matter of preference, I don't like strike through and markup versions because it's a little difficult to track sometimes. So My choice was to provide, side-by-side comparisons of what the old language was and what the new language is proposed to be. So that was made available on our website, and we did receive some comment from WGM Group. Had one other request for information from Bob Giordano with MIST. Didn't receive any comment directly from Bob, but we did have some discussions with Ryan Salisbury from WGM, and after the information was presented, we also received comment from CAPS. So when the information was presented back in November, you were given some of that original documentation, and I don't know if you had a chance to go over it. So at this point, I don't know if you have a preference for how we proceed with going through, almost edit by edit, or if you'd like to focus on kind of the major issues which have come up from the CAPS and WGM comments.
I guess I would lean towards the more general approach as opposed to line by line.
Right, the comments, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I gave you a hard copy of this markup version. And so I can scroll through it fairly quickly on a lot of the smaller issues. And then, the two big changes, well, we had, I guess, 4 big changes in the road construction standards in Section 6, the zoning compliance and zoning compliance permits in Section 9, stormwater and subdivision overlap in Section 12, and road naming and addressing. So I guess that's 5 things. But I think those are the major changes, and some were new additions. So I'll get through some of this rather quickly. And that's why I just want to use this as an example. On the definition of road in the definitions on page 2, we just wanted to make some of our terms consistent with what CAPS has done with the subdivision regulations. So simple things like taking out, the term dwelling on a dwelling unit to provide, to define how a road serves. So a lot of these changes are pretty minor. So we made that change. And then we didn't really have any significant changes until we get to Chapter 5, which is the encroachments. We had drafted that language back in 2010, and which is another thing that the surveyor's office really deals with through, the formal investigation of whether it's an encroachment, is there a right-of-way there that's ours. So they provided completely new language in the encroachments. And so I had originally taken that just verbatim from the surveyor's office. CAPS staff pointed out that there was some confusion in the way the recording was referenced, and so I made some just editing changes. The surveyor's office still does the investigation, still files the paperwork, but I just hopefully cleaned up the language that clarifies that the applicant needs to pay the surveyor's office before their encroachment permit will be filed. So I think is a pretty minor change in that location. And I don't know if I want to jump into Chapter 6 directly or go through some of the other larger scale ones. You have an opinion?
I don't.
Okay. Well, then we'll get, I think I'd come back to Chapter 6. We made a lot of changes in that one just the past few days. So I would, I guess, go through some of the other higher level changes in later sections. I guess we can try zoning compliance for our storm drainage and zoning in zoned areas. This is another one where we worked and work closely with CAPS with the new permitting, and they do a lot of the work in coordination with Brent O'Connor in our office. And so the things that Jamie Erbacher in CAPS and Brent have seen as a matter of practice, that is the way this list developed. We did try to clean it up a little bit. The old version was a lot of text, and so in this version, we pulled things out in this 1 through 5 list. We combined some things. We provided a list of exemptions that were easier to follow. So the big change in this first section 9.1 number 4 is that the condominium and townhome exemption development projects that have recently become available through zoning compliance was something that we had never seen before. A lot of our work is tied to subdivision improvements or, RSID improvements where the residents are making a change. With the CTED developments, there was no real regulation within Public Works for how we review plans and make approvals. So since that wasn't present in the last version of the Public Works Manual, we worked with CAPS to determine how we best go about making reviews and approvals for those projects. So that permit requirement for a CTED was added, and we also, based on practice for the multifamily developments that have been coming through our offices the past several years, tried to determine what level of development required grading or zoning compliance review. Again, Jamie and Brent have seen a number of developments come through, whether it's a multifamily project with 6 dwelling units in one footprint, or we have another one where there's 8 individual houses on one lot. And so based on what we thought was appropriate, we used a cutoff of 3 units to require zoning compliance review. And then, so that next list there, section 9.2 on page 42 is a list of things that we would really not like to see at Public Works because they're so common or they're so minor that we don't want to burden an applicant with a lot of review time or process. So these are things that on a daily basis would not receive review from Public Works for grading and drainage. So again, just something else that we're hopefully trying to make easier for the development community or, the individual residents that are making minor improvements on their property. And then finally, in that section, when there is a zoning plan required, cleared up what information we would like to see. There is a little difference in the language, like in that number 1 there, we had 5 to 9% and then 10%. So we had a range there of kind of an arbitrary 9% rule, what was required for review or not. So we changed the language based on some advice from CAPS and added information in there that we would like to see on those zoning compliance plans to make our review easier and make sure we know what's happening so that we can provide an accurate review and issue the permit as appropriate.
Is it okay to ask questions as we go? Or
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
forget?
sure, go for
Can
it.
you explain the airport authority, the addition of number 10 to that exemption?
Sorry. Yeah, so the airport authority oftentimes will have new hangars constructed, whether it be private or something that they're doing, and they're so regulated by their whoever regulates airports. That's the FAA. I don't know, but a lot of times I'll have to go out on site to take a look at what is going on, and I have no way of accessing the airport for obvious reasons, and it's just, to me, it's just they have their own discharge permit, so the MS4 is not involved with it, and everything there is engineered by a private firm, and I kind of feel like they're being watched over by that authority. So I feel like anything in that area, the airport area, is not something for Public Works to review.
And those standards would apply to, like, if all the new commercial development they expect kind of out there on that land, those same FAA regs will apply to everything on that property, and that's still considered under control of the airport authority, or?
Correct. So the area that I'm speaking of is, of course, the airport, and then even Public Works, where we are at, is actually airport property.
Right.
So yeah, it would include all that.
So you're only talking about the zoning compliance part of this, they still need building permits and that stuff.
Correct. Yeah, I'm just engineering, and that's it. Yeah, I'm not speaking for the building department.
And this was kind of a question from CAPS. We had a couple meetings a couple weeks ago, and Brent and I chose to strike number 5 on the zoning compliance requirements because we really don't have any centralized storm water collection systems. And so this was just kind of a carryover from older documents, and it really didn't make a lot of sense. we could have left it in there and never had it apply. So we figured it was just easier to take it out because most of the developments that we see deal with their stormwater on site on their own. So there really is nothing to connect to. So just a pretty minor deletion in our opinion. We did make some changes last minute to Chapter 10. We received information from CAPS that some of our sidewalk and walkway requirements were not coordinated with their current widths, so we just changed sidewalk widths on these two, or on this section, and rather than recreate the table that we had previously, because it has since changed with subdivision regulations, we just reference back to the subdivision regulations rather than recopy the table, because these really are issues that come from CAPS and Parks, Trails, and Open Land. So we still have our typical sections in the standard drawings for any review, but as far as when they're required or what the required width would be, that would be coming from CAPS. So we just felt it would be cleaner to leave those decisions with CAPS, and then when plans come through still, if it's in the public right-of-way, then we will still provide review and comment. This, I hope we tried to make clearer. The old language, I think, was a little unclear as to how we deal with the process of filing a final plat in a subdivision. So we tried to lay these steps out here pretty clearly. I don't know if that was in place before or if it was an edit that we had made and then again revised after CAPS made comments in the past couple weeks. But this one, we just laid out specifically what developers are required to submit if they want to file their final plat without having the subdivision improvements in place. I think it's always been a little questionable what actually is required, so we laid these 4 things out to make it clear what they need if they want to file that plat. So a lot of these didn't change. The one thing that we do have a new section 15, and that's the addressing. That was a paragraph in the old section of addresses and approaches. Mike Snook with the GIS department provided his preference for language and procedure and requirements for both this new section 15 and the next section 16 road naming. So this, again, something that they've been dealing with for the past several years and are finally just putting into written format so that we can include it with our manual so that it's clear and straightforward.
Because we also got that clarified in state statutes that we had the authority. It was presumed but not really clear, so.
Right, and so those procedures are referenced here so that if there are any questions or problems from residents that may be faced with that situation where we require that they name and then readdress their properties, then this is our backing. And otherwise, the last two sections, the weight restrictions on roads and bridges and the revegetation plans for disturbed sites, nothing changed from those, so that's just old information that we're continuing to provide. So if we go back to section 6, that is the section that saw the most change in the past couple weeks based on comments that were received. And again, no new requirements. We did a lot of formatting. The old standard was very confusing. We had tables for a public road, a private road, a public non-maintained road, a private sub-base materials requirement. So there were just a lot of different tables, a lot of different information that was overlapping, confusing. Some of it was here, some of it was there. So when we incorporated CAPS table, because with their subdivision regulation rewrite, they came up with this new table 6.2, which redefined a lot of the road standards based on subdivision, the number of lots, the lot size, things like that. So we incorporated their table into the manual, and we realized that there were some even after our revisions, when it was first inserted, we still had some conflict with certain footnotes to the table or language in the text where we might have conflicting road width versus, in the text versus what was shown in the table. So a lot of these deletions where you see on page 29, that was all information that was now covered in the table as far as what the required street width was, if there was no parking on one side, parking on both sides. So rather than repeat all that information in the text, I just chose to pull it out. The information, I think, is pretty clear in the table so that if a developer comes in and, they want to propose a certain number of lots and a lot size, then they'll be able to tell from that table from the start what the road requirements will be. So we just did a lot of reorganizing, grouping, called out the subgrade requirements specifically in its own section where previously it had been kind of lost under, for some reason, the public paved road design. So even though obviously subgrade materials are impacted by every other road status, it was only in public paved for some reason. So we pulled that out on its own. Did the same thing with gravels. We consolidated all those into one section finally, rather than using, a public status or a private status or a gravel surface status or an asphalt status for, those sections to have a different gravel specification listed in. So we just put everything in one spot. Combined some tables, made it, we hope, clearer, deleted some tables because we had some old standards that were theoretical, and that was great. But realistically, we only have a couple gravel sources in the valley, and so we, rather than have some specifications that were never going to be used or met, we made that a lot simpler for the suppliers and the developers and the contractors to be able to use what they can actually produce in here and make it work for us. So that information was combined. And the last, I guess, big thing, if I can try to touch on, is that it's not highlighted here, but this number 3 on the warranty and bonding requirements for road construction. This section we've had a lot of problems with in the past. Sometimes if construction didn't meet standard, the proposed solution was, kind of hit and miss. It depended on the engineer or the contractor for what they wanted to do to provide mitigation for any inadequate work. So I think we added this in to try to cover some of the more common problems that we find and just give it an actual place to be found to provide direction for what happens when there, is unfortunately substandard asphalt work. So that was the addition in this part. And otherwise, Brent, I don't know if you have any specific comments that I didn't address, but on a high level, try to get through it pretty quick. That's what we did without going into every detail. It was always our intent to make things easier, make things clearer, and to reflect what the actual practice is now.
Thanks, Eric. Brent, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, just one thing. The comments from WGM Group were brought to our attention about the road widths, and just for the record, they are the subdivision regulations, and that's what the widths that they came up with and approved a few years ago. And Public Works, would be open to revisit those widths at at a point in time that, CAPS and, of course, you guys and everybody would be able to talk about that. So that's it.
Thank you. Okay, this is a public hearing which I'll open. Is there any public comment on the proposed revisions to the Public Works Manual? If so, come on up and state your name for the record. People are drawing straws back there, I see.
Is this on? Oh, it is on. For the record, Ryan Salisbury with WGM Group. Yeah, I did have a chance to connect with County Public Works yesterday, and we discussed a couple of items. And we do understand the importance of the updates in this manual, so we don't want to delay. A lot of these things are going to be great. We do differ on roadway widths, travel lane widths, on what we recommend and are seeing in other subdivisions. The county we recognize is faced with the entire county, which goes all the way up to Condon versus just this immediate surrounding area of Missoula. But so we still support 10-foot travel lanes. And I just, for the record, if we are able to comment if the commissioners choose to adopt this, we would hope and request that we could work with CAPS on the subdivision regulations and start there. But to give you a real quick, there's other people that have to comment. Besides the travel lane widths, it's the exclusion in table 6.2 of curb and gutter. For example, a local public road with parking on both sides is 40 feet, excluding the curb. So if you add the curb to that, to back a curb, you're looking at a 44-foot wide back a curb to back a curb road. And I just did a little bit of inventory on some roads, both in the city and county, that you may or may not be familiar with, and maybe this is for use with the subdivision regulations, but the main entrance road to the Ranch Club is 36-foot back a curb to back a curb. So we're talking about 8 feet larger for that particular road. So there's some conservancy built into the travel lane width, in addition to excluding curb and gutter is kind of the root of my comments. Haugen Drive out in Maloney Ranch, which is in the county, is 24-foot paved with 2-foot shoulders. It would be wider with the current county regulations. And Lower Miller Creek Road is 36-foot. Haugen Drive is 24-foot. Lower Miller Creek Road and the ditch section is 32-foot paved, just for an example. And I've got a bunch more. I might just submit this for the record rather than take up a bunch of time unless you have questions. And I know that Commissioner Rowley had a question about pitch and putt and preserved place, and those being extremely narrow roads. Those are those were never accepted for county maintenance, so they're privately maintained. But the roads I talked about for the main entrance to the Ranch Club were significantly larger. That Ranch Club was 36-foot back a curb to back a curb. Preserved place is only 21. So the minimum that we're recommending is nearly 15 feet bigger than that. And then the county public works regs are even bigger than that. So, and then pitch and putt is a 32-foot back a curb to back a curb, which is the street I live on in Phase 6 of Maloney Ranch, parking on both sides. And we were proposing in my WGM group comments 35-foot back a curb to back a curb. So I think there's some middle ground in there for what it's worth. That's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Ryan, are all of those things, Ryan or Eric, are they all in the subdivision regs? I mean, we want them to match, but right now we'd need to review them there too. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe you guys could help me out, Eric, or is the exclusion of the curb and gutter in the subdivision regulations, or is that just the public works regulations? That one I have the subdivision regulations here, I can look. I didn't see it.
Tim's sitting out there too.
That's
Tim
what
might
I was
be
looking
able to
at
answer
Jamie.
that one.
Yeah, they did copy it's in the subdivision regulations. Pavement widths do not include bike lanes, curb and gutter, or 2-foot shoulders. So
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think that came about at the time because there were questions in the past, and I think CAPS reflected that before we did. So that was a joint agreement.
Thank you. Additional comment?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Sam Sill. I'm here on behalf of the Missoula Organization of Realtors. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. I want to thank Public Works staff for the work on the amendments. I would agree with Ryan. There are some good and important changes in here that we certainly don't want to delay either, and we would like to see the roadway widths addressed at a future time through the subdivision a regulation amendment process. The roads we feel are too wide. A 12-foot travel lane is like an interstate width. There's certainly, I believe, a safety and quality of life issue there. They're way too wide for neighborhood streets, which ultimately I think will lead to faster traffic and less safe, less walkable neighborhoods. I believe there's also a sustainability issue here. Compared to narrower roads, the wider roads are less sustainable to the extent that they require more materials to complete, especially oil-based products like asphalt. There's the increased chance for stormwater runoff, which could potentially jeopardize water quality in the area. And, roads that are any narrower than what they need to be are certainly wasteful of our dwindling supply of developable land. I believe there's also a housing affordability issue here. Wider roads are significantly more expensive than narrower roads. If we're talking about the difference between a 40-some foot section and a 35-foot section. It's worth noting that those infrastructure costs are passed on to consumers when they buy a home, and when those costs are passed on, it is rolled into a mortgage, and the consumer pays interest on it, which amplifies the cost. And the other thing I think is worth noting is more expensive infrastructure means fewer projects are going to pencil out, and that means fewer homes are built, and ultimately the trend that we have saw over the last few years in terms of increasing home prices is more likely to continue. The county planning documents seem to indicate the quality of life and sustainability and housing affordability are goals of the county, and we would like to see the county better align its infrastructure standards with those goals. So with that said, we would love to see the county consider narrower roadways within the subdivision regulations, and then hopefully the Public Works Manual can be amended to that extent too in the future. The only other thing that we noticed that was raised a question for us was the residential driveway spacing requirement of 35 feet. Just taking a look around at the aerial maps this morning, it does seem like that it's pretty common to have two parcels with the garages are right next to one another. It seems like you wouldn't be able to do that under these regs, and what would happen is you would have kind of I guess you'd have to have sort of a cookie cutter site layout for developments that go in. It would be, house, garage, all the way across, which is, I believe, a design of lesser quality. It's certainly not as visually interesting as what, could be done if that spacing requirement was either narrowed up a little bit or, perhaps done away with entirely. Those are the only two things that we noticed. I think the amendments are going to be useful and helpful in improving infrastructure standards in Missoula, but we'd love to see those two items addressed. Thank you.
Sam, which one was what page is the residential driveway spacing on? Is that in 6 also?
I think I want to say 4.9, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, 4.910.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you, Mr. Sell.
Thank you.
Is there additional public comment?
For the record, my name is Matt Smith. I represent Professional Consultants Incorporated. I'm an engineer with them. I would like to echo what Ryan Salisbury just said about the road widths, especially when we're talking about residential urban subdivisions. And as an example that I have in a neighborhood I live on, if you remember Christian Drive in the Linda Vista neighborhood, when it was originally constructed, it was constructed to 42 feet back curb to back a curb. And the residents on that street complained enough to the city that they tried to reduce the speeds by placing traffic calming devices on that street with varying degrees of success. Right next door, a block away, is the more recent Jeff Drive, which was constructed to a 32-foot back a curb to back a curb. Same functional street, It has 32 feet back to curb with parking on both sides. It has a boulevard sidewalk with a 5-foot wide sidewalk, and I think it's a 6-foot wide boulevard. Boulevard trees along the outside. Speeds on that road have dropped, are significantly lower. Basically, they're about a 20-mile-an-hour speed, which to me is, I think, ideal for a residential subdivision. Trying to keep those speeds low just lends itself to making a narrower road, especially in residential subdivisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Additional comment? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Is there are questions or discussion by the commission?
Yeah, is Tim still here, right?
Yeah, Mr. Worley.
Yeah, Tim, okay. Hi, Tim.
Hi.
So this be for you and for Brent and Eric, but what I was trying to figure out is if we want them to match, if we want subdivision and public works manual to match, would it be better to just refer to one in the other, or just say that when one changes, the other does, or we just notice them together? What do you think the best process is?
My opinion would be to take the maintenance changes forward as they are right now, which don't recommend changing this table at this time. We could wrap those changes that everybody's talking about now into the maintenance changes. I think it'll extend some of the other things we hope to accomplish with maintenance. But the Public Works Manual will probably have to follow with a quick administrative change before the board. I don't think it would take very long.
It seems like
Whenever we
could-
choose to do that, whether we do it as part of maintenance or maybe as another initiative, I think it's going to take a little time on its own if we're going to slim up those standards just to figure out what the appropriate approach is.
And Commissioner Curtis, is what you're getting at maybe not necessarily focus on lane widths per se, but is there language that we could include in the Public Works Manual that would kind of reference, so we don't have to change both documents in essence, by reference, if something changed in the subdivision regulations, that would kind of take effect without having to then go back, and is that kind of what
Right,
you're-
going
what you're
forward,
getting?
I mean, I think that right now that we're going to have to make them both get together, but then going forward, if we had some reference language, it might make it easier. So I think lane width, what I hear today is lane width, but also that whole including curb and gutter or excluding curb and gutter from the lane width. I thought Mr. Smith's comments about a 10-foot reduction in street width resulting in a 20-mile-an-hour, I mean, it totally is how you feel driving. You know, most of us don't drive 80 in town, but on the freeway might feel like we can. And I think that I know that it would extend the section of maintenance that you're trying to do, but it seems like it makes sense to do it. But what you're saying is you don't think that we should, that it's not just lane width, that there's some other things that you'd want to discuss?
No, I think it could be wrapped into maintenance if you like. I think it'll just take a little time going back and forth with Public Works to get a feel for how we want to slim up those road widths, if that's ultimately appropriate. It'll probably just add to process a little bit.
Okay.
Right now, we're out for kind of an agency review of the subregs, and we were going to jump to kind of the larger list of folks that usually review these things. And we would probably pause that next step a little bit if we want to slim up these roads.
Or we could finish what you're doing and address that section separately is
Right.
the two options you
Yeah,
said?
that's correct.
And and maybe you mentioned this in the last discussion that we had, but it would be useful to get some ballpark at some point down the line in terms of realistically how much additional time would wrapping the road width potential road width changes into the maintenance amendments. I mean, if we're talking a couple weeks or something, maybe it's no big deal. If it's months, that's a different matter. I would be interested in, based on testimony we've heard, revisiting road widths at some point for all of the reasons mentioned. I also have to say that it seems somewhat backwards to design our infrastructure based on the size of our equipment rather than right-sizing our equipment to match what infrastructure we want. So I think that can be part of the discussion also. Additional questions?
I would agree. I'm certainly open to looking at the road widths. I don't think that, of course, we talked about it during the subdivision regulations, but there wasn't the public testimony and whatnot that we examined it this closely. So it, again, yeah, everything that has said makes sense. And I'm really glad that you guys went out and measured roads. That really puts into context what size things are, and, you know, the fact that the road I think of that is way too small by what you're proposing would still be too small. And, you know, it sounds like it's a good balance that makes sense between having good infrastructure for quality of life, but also being better for sustainability and affordable housing and everything. So I think that's a good thing to wrap into our maintenance and take another look at.
Somebody must have a drone that they could fly. Because, I mean, it does give you a different perspective to see it that way. So I do have another question for Eric then.
Sure, I've got one for Tim, if you can.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Tim, before you leave, and this might be for Eric also, we heard mention of residential driveway spacing requirements. Is that also something in both the subdivision regulations and this manual, or where does that live?
Just in the manual.
Okay.
What's the rationale?
Yeah, Eric, could you speak to this? I mean, it seems like something that maybe not today, but at some point might be worth revisiting. But if you want to give your shot at why it is what it is.
Well, it's never a popular answer, but it's because it's the way it's always been. I mean, honestly, as far as I know, when we developed the manual originally back in 2008, we were incorporating previous resolutions, previous policy, and I believe that a lot of the information in the approach section 4 of the manual, came from a previously approved, I think it was in the mid-'80s, 1986, resolution from the commissioners that had a lot of that information. And so we've just been carrying it forward. I know that there is some disagreement with that. My preference is that when you get to those lot sizes where that spacing might become a little more critical. You know, it's not going to be on the 1 or 2 or 5 acre parcel out in a rural area. It's going to be where you're going to have small lots, and where we have small lots, we're likely going to have more on-street parking. You're going to have, 2 or 3 cars in a driveway. And I guess my preference is that if those driveways are spaced farther apart, that as you're coming out of your driveway, it provides a little more of a sight triangle than a driveway that's 10 feet away and has another car parked in it. It might not be critical. That's, I guess, my preference. It's always going to provide more sight distance as you have increased spacing between areas where you're likely going to have parked cars, parked trailers, parked boats. And so it was never a thought for me or for Brent, I believe, to think about changing. It's difficult to say, like the engineers in the private community see. They develop a subdivision with a certain lot size, and they have no idea what that lot layout is going to be when someone purchases that lot. They don't know what the garage and house layout is going to be. They don't know where the driveway is going to be. And that's why we say, and I don't know if Brent could answer this, whether or not we've made exceptions in the past, but that's why we say, unless individual lot dimensions make a restriction, that we can't make that 35-foot spacing. So.
Yeah, and I guess I can comment on that. So this resolution, I think, was passed like in 86 or 89 or something like that. My subdivision I live in is 95, so that resolution would have been alive then. And I live at the end of a cul-de-sac, and my next door neighbor's approach is 5 feet away from me. So I can think of other subdivisions in the last 10 years that it's I wouldn't say it's common, because a lot of these subdivisions, there's not what they consider a laydown, where the engineer's actually pinpointing where these approaches are gonna be. They come in later and then they cut them in as where the house best fits. But, you know, there's several subdivisions that this 35-foot width, is not regulated. I mean, just because it just doesn't fit. And I think that some of our language in here gives us the ability to allow that variance. So that's what it is.
So,
Okay, Jean and then Cola,
oh, okay.
unless you're changing.
What I heard Mr. Sill say was kind of for if people decide to put their garages together. So I just wondered if it would be easy to add something to talk about if you basically almost had a shared driveway. There'd be, just to clarify that that could be an expected exception.
Yeah, I don't think that it would matter to us. I mean, I would think that, you know, there are some utilities that, like a transformer or fire hydrant or something like that, you know, if the developer wanted to put a shared driveway right here and there happens to be a fire hydrant there or a public utility, I mean, I think you could run into some problems that way, but, you know, I don't think that it's necessarily a safety concern in a residential subdivision where, you know, like on highways and stuff like that, they like to limit the conflict points where you have faster speeds and probably more traffic than you see in a residential subdivision. But like I said, I don't, there's a lot of times that this 35-foot spacing is not used, so.
So can I just follow up to that?
Yeah,
'Cause
sure.
so it sounds to me like while it says this on paper, in practicality, you work with what makes sense on the ground. It's not as restrictive as it might seem because it has that exception language.
I would agree with that.
Okay.
So I just don't see why we don't just get rid of it then, though. If it's not enforced and it's not, there's no engineering standard that it upholds, it's not really necessarily, other than people's opinion of, and I respect your opinion, but yeah, of sight distance, and you are backing out into a residential street, and you know, and I have seen houses that are in subdivisions post 95 too that do have even like a shared approach, and it kind of goes into two driveways. So I guess I'm not sure why we have to regulate that.
I guess my comment to that would be, I think that it'd be advisable to at least give Public Works the opportunity to dictate where that approach would be at, because there might be some circumstances that you need spacing, or you need to have it far enough away from an intersection or something like that, because they could, if we don't have any limit at all, or we don't have any discretion at all, you know, they could put that anywhere in a lot line, and they could be, you know, move it up towards a stop sign or something like that, where you're always causing conflicts with crosswalks and,
Regulated right now,
well, I mean, other than,
35-foot spacing, not.
true, yeah, no, I agree.
So, I guess first, Mr. Sill, would you like to come back up to the mic? Yes, I guess specifically, what would you see language-wise that would address your concern? Either more latitude for Public Works to review on a case-by-case basis and allow exceptions, or something else?
Well, first of all, I'm not an engineer, so, you know, keep that in mind. But I reviewed the city standards, and I think what the city does is, I don't want to throw out exact numbers, but basically you have to be, you know, the driveway has to be a certain amount of distance if there's a crosswalk on the street. I want to say it's like 20 feet from the point of curvature of an intersection. So, you know, maybe something like that would be helpful. And then, you know, getting rid of the spacing requirement entirely, you know, accompanying with those changes would work.
Okay, thank you. And for the record, I am not an engineer either, so I'm shooting from the hip a little, but looking for some sort of a solution. Yeah, Mr. Mostad, come on up.
It's kind of interesting to sit there and listen and kind of remember some of the history of some of this stuff over the years.
Gene, could you state your name for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry, Gene Mostad, Mostad Construction. My experiences over the past of dealing with all of the different agencies with the city is anytime that we can have more predictability is always good. When we have unpredictability and then we hear one thing over here and then it's different when we come in over here is very frustrating. So anytime you have a rule and it's not being enforced the same all the time is very frustrating, because when you're in my position and we're dealing with clients and we're saying, okay, yes, you can do this and yes, you can do that. And then you go downtown and no, you can't do that, but that person did that, is very frustrating. So when it comes to this type of subject, it is a lot better if you get rid of the rule. If you're not going to do it, either you do it or you don't do it. There were, years ago, one of the rules on the driveway curb cuts was that you couldn't have anything over 21 feet. Even with a 3-car garage, you had to slope them in, and then finally they made it so that you could have, 35 or 36 feet, which I guess was good because people didn't want to, their kids were driving over their yards and all that kind of stuff. But I guess my main comment is that their predictability is always great. And as far as the road widths and stuff with the subdivisions that I've done in the past, we've always wanted the narrow roads to calm the traffic down. And obviously when we're designing subdivisions, if we can put curves in the roads to slow people down too, we like doing that. But I just completed a subdivision last year on Preston Street, and it has the narrow roads, and the people love it, and it's a through street. And if it was wider, the people would even be going faster. They already wanted to put speed bumps in it, and it's curved and it's narrower. If it was 8 or 10 feet wider, it would be really bad. Thank you.
The blinking red light, that can't be good. Okay, I think we've got a dead mic. Thanks, Gene. So I guess on this particular item, our options are either try to hammer out a solution relative to residential driveway spacing here on the spot, bracket that item and look at a potential amendment to the Public Works manual at a later date, or hold the item open and not make a final decision on the Public Works manual today, pending addressing this particular issue if the commission feels it's important enough.
So I just wondered whether we, so number 9, it looks to me like in 4.9.9, seems to give Public Works that kind of flexibility of things, keeping things away from intersections and those things. So I wondered if it made sense for number 10 to say minimum spacing near edges of residential approach are preferred to be 35 feet unless, I mean, to kind of make it sound like that's the standard you should go for unless you have some of these other constraints. I wonder if that's a compromise that makes sense to Mr. Mostad. Does that make it still too iffy? If it's the recommended unless there are constraints? Yeah, that's better.
I thought in general, though, we try to avoid putting, in our manuals and our regulations and things like that, we try to avoid saying, recommended. It's either required to be this way or it's not. who's going to care that we prefer that it's 35 feet? I don't know. I would rather just see it left out, but that's fine if that's how we want to do it.
Any input from you two? Because you see the stuff come in.
I mean, I think that 9 does give us the flexibility that I'd be concerned with. The 35 probably doesn't.
So we could delete
I would
number
just
10?
strike it, yeah.
Strike paragraph 10 entirely?
The 35 feet. Well,
So that'd be 10 then.
4.9.10.
yeah, strike 10.
Okay. Gene, did you want to make a motion to that effect?
Sure. I would move that we strike 4.9.10 and renumber items 11 through 13.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded, and all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that carries.
So I guess I just have one more thing kind of for the commission to discuss, is does it make sense for us to adopt the Chapter 6 as presented today so that it does match the subdivision regulations, and then just know that as we revisit it in the subdivision regulations, whether we add it onto what they're doing now or do it separate, that we would simultaneously amend these regulations to either refer to the others or to reflect them. I kind of think that right now we have two things out there that are different. So if we make a match, it makes more sense to me than just waiting.
Yeah, I would concur. This would at least bring both of our kind of regulatory or guidance documents into line. And it's going to be a number of months before the maintenance amendments are brought to fruition. So, Eric?
Yeah, and I would agree. I think it would make sense to adopt these now. If those maintenance rewrites through the subregs are going to take a while, or even if they don't, then our opinion is that the information that we've changed in Chapter 6 is, I think, beneficial, is clearer to the development community. So right now, our table 6.2 for the required road widths matches subdivision regulations. And we also have, whether it's enough of a catch-all statement, in the opening paragraph of Section 6 there, it says, in case of conflict between these regulations and all the others, subdivision regulations are the first priority to be followed. So if there is a difference between the Public Works Manual and the subdivision regulations for any length of time or anything significant, the subdivision regulations are going to govern. So if that's enough of a catch-all to give us the time to make our edits, our administrative changes after, or if it's can be worked out simultaneously with the subdivision regulations, then we can make those changes later as they do, or their rules will govern.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I guess I would also just throw out as a possibility that as we go through the maintenance process of the subdivision regulations on a periodic or annual basis, that'd probably be a great time to update this document so we're not having to make major changes after several years. Okay, thanks.
So if we wanted to do that today, do we refer to, is the one that you put on our desk today, the red letter stuff you showed today that you've done in working with WGM and staff is what we want to adopt? I just want to use the right language to say that.
Yes,
Is
the
it
copy
this
that you
one?
have, the copy that you have reflects all of the changes from CAPS and WGM and our meetings since, and our discussions since the draft copy was made available in November. So this is the most current copy with updates.
And as amended, as we just
Right.
voted on.
So I would move that we adopt the revisions as amended to the Public Works Manual and direct staff Public Works and CAP staff to form a work group with the development community to look at those road widths and that section 6.
Great.
Second?
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any additional discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. Okay. Thanks, Eric and Brent. Thanks, everyone, for your thoughtful input and comments. I think it's helped make the document better. Thanks. So, last but not least, we have one additional public hearing today. This is related to the B&M Zoo subdivision. Once you get situated, Casey, feel free to give us a staff report.
All right, Casey Drayton with Missoula County Community and Planning Services here to present the staff report for the B&M Zoo subdivision. This is a subdivision in Missoula County, in which case the applicant is B&M Zoo LLC with the representative Territorial Landworks. The planning board met and heard this subdivision request on December 20th, 2017, and we are here today in front of the Board of County Commissioners for the next step in the process. This subdivision is located about a quarter mile north of Highway 93 off of Blue Mountain Road. It would be just to the east of Blue Mountain Road, just north of the Peak Health and Wellness facility that's out there. Closer shot at the property here, I'll show you what we're working with currently. It's just over 13 acres in size. The only development on the property is located at the southeast side. You can see the Watson Children's Center there is captured in this property. In addition to the Children's Center, there's the parking facilities, as well as a wastewater treatment center located on the property. Other than that, it's primarily undeveloped. We can see here that the site slopes gently across sort of a top bench, as I'll refer to it, from Blue Mountain Road all the way across the site until you hit a fairly steep drop off, which will take you down to a lower tier, which would be down there near the big flat irrigation ditch at the northeast corner of the property. Taking a look at the site, we can see there has been some disturbance across a primary portion of it. This would be in the area proposed for development for the most part. There's a mix of some older construction type materials as well as some fills. It looks like there might have been some cuts on the property as well at one point in time, but it's primarily just kind of an undeveloped dumping of sorts out there that we can see as we work through the property. These two shots here taken from Google Earth to try and give you some better context without snow or anything on the ground. Show the portion of the property that is at the northeast corner near the big flat irrigation ditch. The property is a little bit further than where these photos are taken from. You can see it just off in the distance. It runs down the hill and just about out to the irrigation ditch, but doesn't actually capture the irrigation ditch. This gives a little bit of a better perspective in terms of where that property is in relation to surrounding development. You can see the Peak tennis facilities located immediately adjacent there. There is some existing residential development, one home located on the south side as well as some more to the north and west, and then a handful of residential development across Blue Mountain Road currently exists. Varying acreage out there. There isn't a real consistent subdivision base out there. Everything that's located off to the east is generally described as in the floodplain, so there's not a ton of development out there. There are a few things here and there that you'll find out there, like the veterinary clinic that you can see down at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. This property is in the 1998 Urban Comprehensive Plan area. The general land use recommendation for this parcel is residential 2 dwelling units per acre. That land use designation is pretty consistent over the course of this area. It doesn't really change until you get on the other side of Blue Mountain Road for a general parks and open space designation, but this area is primarily residential. Looking into the zoning on this property, we're in citizen-initiated zoning district 43 residential subdistrict. Looking at the general zoning of the area, it's somewhat of a mosaic of different zoning districts. We have citizen-initiated zoning as well as some Part 2 county zonings as well. We have zoning district 39, we have zoning district 43, all three subdistricts. We have zoning district 18 with a few different designations. And then we also have some CA1, some large tract county zoning located just off Blue Mountain Road off to the west, as well as some CI1 light industrial zoning across Highway 93 to the south. So it's not very consistent. Oh, and don't forget some unzoned parcels tossed in the middle. So not very consistent out there, but this area we're looking at, like I mentioned, is primarily residential in nature at 2 dwelling units per acre. The proposal in front of us is for a 19-lot major subdivision on 13.29 acres. This is the B&M Zoo subdivision. 18 lots will be new residential development as proposed. Lot 1 of the subdivision would house the Watson Children's Center and existing facilities. The primary access is off of Blue Mountain Road. The subdivision will be served by 2 new internal roads referred to as proposed road A, our primary road coming off of Blue Mountain Road, and then proposed road B would be the short hammerhead going up to the north. In addition, the Watson Children's Center on Lot 1 is accessed off Buckhouse Lane, so we do have some existing access there. The rest of the lots all kind of fall generally around those roads with some common area designed to sort of encompass the greater portion of the property, I guess you could say, and then a small common area in the middle of the lots out there that we'll get to a little later on. So looking into zoning and growth policy compliance for this subdivision request specifically, looking at the 2016 Missoula County Growth Policy as well as the 1998 Urban Comprehensive Plan as an amendment to that 2016 policy, generally recommends guiding appropriate scale of development to areas based on access to existing services and proximity to critical natural resources. It has a couple different tiers of land use designations described in that plan. It has a higher density where you don't find any natural resource concerns or natural resource areas. It has kind of a mid-tier density scaling, which is the 2 dwelling units per acre that we're looking at here, where you do have some resource concerns, but you also have some services that can offer things such as appropriate access to schools, fire, safety, things of that nature. Some of those could include access to water and sewer, although the larger community systems are not available out here, municipal systems, I should say. And then looking at zoning district 43 residential, as mentioned earlier, it recommends a maximum residential density of 2 dwelling units per acre. This subdivision comes in below that with 19 dwelling units on 13 acres. Permitted uses do include single-family residential. There's a few other uses listed in there that are fairly standard for that type of zoning. Looking into the subdivision review criteria, we'll start off with ag and ag water user facilities. The site is mapped as prime soils. When we look at the history of this tract, there's been no indication that it's ever been utilized for agriculture. These screenshots here are what we have available in terms of aerial imagery. Going back to 1955, we can see the site's been disturbed in that center portion. It looks fairly similar to what it does now, based on what we can see from this screenshot here. I believe the Mostad family's owned it for a long length of time as well, and they've confirmed that there's been no agricultural use on this property. In addition, on the agricultural aspect, zoning district 43, I mentioned earlier, it has 3 subdistricts to it. It has a residential subdistrict that we're dealing with on this property. It has a commercial subdistrict located up closer to Highway 93. Then there was an agricultural subdistrict set aside down on that lower bench area, down in a large portion of floodplain. This area was set aside or imposed by that citizen-initiated zoning as an appropriate area for agriculture. One of the only other uses recommended down there would be for a veterinarian clinic, which we do have on the property, but other than that, it's primarily set aside for ag use. So at the time of zoning, it was really identified that the ag out in this area should take place down on this lower bench just past the big flat irrigation ditch, whereas up on this top tier it was suited for residential development with commercial closer to the highway, which seems to align pretty well with a lot of development patterns that you find. As mentioned, these soils are considered prime farmland if irrigated. There's currently no agricultural water user facilities on this property. They do not have access to the Big Flat irrigation ditch that's located on an adjacent property. It serves a handful of other properties located off in the Big Flat area, so we're not going to be able to get any access off of that here, and there's no additional facilities associated with this property or groundwater that would be able to, or has been, I guess, been identified to reasonably support agriculture. There's two different soil designations with the property. We have a portion of Big Arm gravelly loam, and we also have some Grantsdale loam. If you look into these two different soil profiles, you'll find that the Grantsdale loam is generally a little more productive in terms of agriculture. The area of this property that is Grantsdale loam is a very small portion located at the bottom of that steep drop-off, which then runs out into the Big Flat irrigation ditch and beyond, out into that agricultural zoning designation or subdistrict. Up at the top, you have the Big Arm gravelly loam, which is considered prime farmland if you irrigate it. It might not have all the qualities that you'd find with the Grantsdale loam, but it still is considered prime farmland, yes. As mentioned, the Big Flat irrigation ditch runs adjacent to the property. Staff has noted that there could be some runoff concerns from water from this subdivision down that embankment towards the irrigation ditch. They do have some grading and drainage plans that have been presented in the application, which call out a water detention pond down at the bottom there to catch that runoff, in which case they would be dispersing it at rates comparable to pre-development conditions. Taking a look into our local services aspect, as I mentioned, the primary access is utilized off Blue Mountain Road. They're proposing an access to align with Evergreen Road. The current access to the site is just a little bit to the south of Evergreen Road. It's kind of an unofficial dirt access that we can see here. That's about how it looks today. The new proposed Road A, as it's being called on the preliminary plat, will align with Evergreen Road for safety concerns. Looking into Blue Mountain Road, staff had identified that Blue Mountain Road actually does not meet county standards, and in order to provide legal and physical access to this property, that Blue Mountain Road would need to meet county standards. Because of that, staff has recommended a variance request associated with this subdivision for an off-site road, Blue Mountain Road. That road's 24 feet in width within a 60-foot easement. Staff's recommending approval of that variance request as the need for widening Blue Mountain Road right here hasn't been identified. County Public Works commented on a few different aspects of the subdivision. Those comments you'll find in the application, none of which identified any improvements to Blue Mountain Road being necessary or warranted, either due to this subdivision request or just in general. I mentioned Buckhouse Lane does provide another off-site access to Lot 1 of the subdivision, which is the Watson Children's Center. This serves a lot less development and therefore needs a lesser road standard. Staff has found that this road does meet county standards as it stands currently. And within the subdivision, the two new roads, as proposed, would be 32-foot wide asphalt roads within a 60-foot wide access easement. Both the roads would allow parking along one side. They both terminate in a T-type turnaround facility that would need to be approved by County Public Works prior to approval of the final plating of this. Pedestrian access in this subdivision is provided by a 8-foot sidewalk along one side of both proposed on-site roads. There's an additional pedestrian access trail and easement that connects those two T-type turnarounds and runs along a common area that you can see up there. They would be cement sidewalks, and there'd be a 7-foot boulevard. Staff's recommending some conditions and related to boulevard landscaping. But a pretty standard design on that front in terms of the pedestrian access. One more note while we are here is that they are proposing to stripe an access across Blue Mountain Road should that future trail come in along Blue Mountain Road, which is proposed for that southwest side of the road. Looking into the water system for the subdivision, they're proposing a new public water supply system to serve the 18 residential lots. Lot 1, the Watson Children's Center, is currently served by an existing system in conjunction with some of the peak facilities. This new public water supply system will be served by 2 wells. These wellheads have been put in. They're located, the two Ws that you can see here would be the wellhead locations. It's been cut back into that hillside quite a bit to get down there to that lower bench. Water testing in the area has confirmed that there is adequate flow for quantity and quality to come out of these wells to serve this proposed subdivision. There has been some concern raised over top of the regulation of the quantity of water that this subdivision may draw. Staff has recommended a few conditions in relation to monitoring the wells down there. This primarily has to do with the DNRC combined appropriation rulings and maintaining a maximum of 10 acre-feet of water per year for the entire development out there. That's what those conditions are related to. I'd be happy to touch in more detail if we do have questions on the specifics of that as we go along. And just for the record, I will go through a couple of these adjacent property owner comments towards the end of this before we get down to the recommendations. Looking at the proposed sewer system, they're proposing to tie into the existing sewer system, which serves the Watson Children's Center as well as some of the Peak Health and Wellness facilities. This is a sequencing batch reactor facility, which does a pretty good job, as I understand, of treating this sewage to fairly low nitrate levels before discharging it into the drain fields. There's existing drain field facilities located down to the south across Buckhouse Lane that'll be adequate to serve phase one of this proposed subdivision, which would be 11 new residential lots. With the platting of phase two, they're proposing a new drain field, which was located just here behind the Peak Tennis Building, with a replacement drain field area located down at the corner of the property nearest to Blue Mountain Road. Looking at the Parks and Rec aspect of this subdivision, the subdivider is proposing a common area within the subdivision. As mentioned, it kind of wraps around the property as a buffer zone between Blue Mountain Road as well as existing and adjacent residential development. That common area then ties into sort of a central common area that we can see located within the property. 0.87 acres is what would have been required for parks, open space, or common area dedication with this subdivision. This area in total comes out to about 3.37 acres, I believe it is, of common area. Granted, yes, a lot of it is taken up with the sewer facilities that we can see here. It runs down this whole area through there. And it's been found that the remainder, sort of this buffer area, is fairly unusable in terms of common area. It'll provide a nice benefit to the homeowners who live directly adjacent to it, but it may not provide a great area for most of the landowners within the subdivision to utilize. The only area that's been identified for that would be this central common area. We found that this common area in total, taking into account the buffer as well as the central area, does not meet the park design standards found in subdivision regulations. Therefore, staff has recommended cash in lieu. Some of the, I guess the applicant is proposing that this central common area be used for a active or passive recreation. We didn't really have any details provided in the application as to how they plan to achieve that. There would likely need to be some grading to accommodate that, as well as some seeding and irrigation. Knowing that there are some water quantity concerns here, we didn't want to recommend over-irrigating anything on that front, certainly, so we're recommending cash in lieu of parks and open space dedication. That common area would remain with that cash in lieu. As shown on the preliminary plat, it would be up to the homeowners association to utilize that how they so desire. Looking into the fire access, we have, or fire department aspect, we have one fire hydrant proposed in the subdivision. This has been reviewed by Missoula Rural Fire, the appropriate fire jurisdiction out here. Their nearest station is about 3 miles away. This one hydrant would be served by an existing 50,000 gallon cistern that is down at the Peak facilities. They do have an agreement worked out to tie into that to provide the water supply to that hydrant, which then, according to Missoula Rural Fire, would be suitable to serve this development. If they weren't, for some reason, able to get the final sign-off from Rural Fire, they would be required to put residential fire sprinklers in each dwelling unit as proposed in the conditions. Looking at the natural environment, wildlife, and wildlife habitat, most of the area hasn't really been identified as good wildlife habitat. As we saw, there's a handful of use on the property in terms of dumping materials, and it seems like people coming and going often. The area that has been identified as some good natural environment area with potential to harbor wildlife or wildlife habitat is down closer towards the big flat irrigation ditch and across that steep slope. There were a handful of comments during agency comment raised by the Five Valleys Audubon. They noted the bird habitat that would be down near that irrigation ditch area. They do make a handful of references to the important bird area mapping and the fact that this property lies right at the southern tier of kind of the greater Missoula area. There's then a little bit of a gap before you get down into the Bitterroot, but that area has been identified internationally as an important bird area, and we're directly adjacent to that, as well as the floodplain area preventing a lot of development. That certainly helps out with the bird aspect as well. That 25% slope that we saw 2 slides up, pretty much everything in this kind of dark gray shaded area would be required to be designated as a no-build zone on the final plat because of the slope category. Staff is further recommending that there be a no-build, no-disturbance zone with some specific language as to what can and cannot happen in that zone. That would effectively go from the top of that 25% slope all the way to the property line. There is a handful of flat area beyond the bottom of that 25% slope. We just wanted to ensure that that area remains natural for those wildlife concerns that were addressed, and some of the grassland aspects that were addressed as well in the agency comments. This no build, no disturbance zone would restrict everything from your standard buildings, sheds, fences, domestic grasses. It's really meant to keep it totally natural. There is one exception that we've included in there, and that is to allow access to utilities and for any improvements associated with the utilities necessary down there. So that would be those wells that are down there, as well as the stormwater drainage basin down at the bottom. So there would be a little bit of activity down there, which has already occurred to some extent with putting in those wells, but it would restrict any further so that we don't end up with any more cumulative impacts to that area. Public health and safety, we felt was pretty standard in this subdivision. It's addressed in the findings of fact. I'd be happy to go over any of those concerns that you may have. And then looking into compliance with survey requirements, everything on the plat seemed to align pretty well other than the naming of the preliminary plat. Staff's recommending a condition that be changed from Blue Mountain subdivision to B&M Zoo subdivision, just to align with all of the application materials that we've received thus far. I think this preliminary plat's the only thing that indicates it is Blue Mountain subdivision, but for clarity's sake, it'd be nice to get everything aligned under one name. This subdivision, as I mentioned, is proposed in 2 phases. All of the green area that you can see on this slide is part of phase 1. That's 11 residential lots in the Watson Children's Center. And then phase 2, shown in the pink, would be 8 additional residential lots. The dates proposed on filing for those phases for phase 1 would be in 2023 and 2029 for phase 2. Jumping back to the planning board hearing that we had back in December. Planning board discussion topics revolved primarily around water resource concerns. There were a handful of concerns raised in addition based on the agricultural soils that are found on site. At that hearing, we did have some public testimony from adjacent property owners mirroring concerns over the water quantity issues in this area. And to address some of those comments that we went over that were received prior to planning board, there was a comment letter received from the Community Food Agriculture Coalition. They noted that this property is mapped as prime farmland if irrigated. They noted that there hadn't been any mitigation and that they're recommending denial of it. To sum it up in general, I provided a copy to each of the commissioners up front here today. I believe you should have it. And can go over that in more detail if you would like. In addition to that, an adjacent property owner, Eric Anderson, provided a handful of comments that came in early on. Those are included in the executive summary, as well as one additional comment that was passed out to you today, going over some of the conditions that were recommended in the staff report. Eric's concerns are over water quantity in the wells, really looking at it at sort of a comprehensive aspect for the entire area. Those comments were primarily the only ones received prior to planning board. In addition to that, there was another property owner who did note some wildlife concerns. She mentioned that there is some wildlife that utilizes that area to come down from Blue Mountain and access the Big Flat irrigation ditch for water further out into the floodplain area. Planning board, with that testimony and deliberation, came up with an amended condition, that is condition number 14, as noted in the planning board memo. They amended it slightly to strike the number 18 from it, as well as add the fact that they would be sending a copy of the well monitoring reports to CAPS as well as DNRC. So our office would retain a copy as well as DNRC. And then they also recommended a new condition, condition number 16, that a provision should be added to the covenants to apprise future lot owners of the restrictions and responsibilities necessary to maintain overall water usage of less than 10 acre feet for the subdivision as a whole. Reference of this provision shall be added to the amendment section of the covenants, so that'll remain there in perpetuity. After planning board voted unanimously to approve both of those condition amendments. They voted unanimously to recommend that the variance be approved. There was some discussion on the necessity of the variance. Staff did go over that with them in terms of the legal and physical access aspect. And then on a 4-3 vote, they did pass the recommendation that the B&M subdivision be approved. Now, after planning board, we have had 2 additional adjacent property owners, one of which stopped in. He was planning to present written comment. I don't believe he's here today. His concern was over top of the phase 2 drain field replacement area being out close to Blue Mountain Road. He lives directly across Blue Mountain Road. He's concerned that he won't be able to put a well in if that drain field replacement area is there. I did inform him that he would need to have 100-foot well isolation zone easement around that well. His concern was that if they put that drain field there, effectively he would have to move his well 20 to 30 feet back from his property line in order to put a well in there. If he were ever to subdivide the property or something, he would, if he was to get any closer to his property line, have to go seek a well isolation zone easement from the B&M Zoo property owner in order to do that. So it's kind of reciprocal. They would both have to work in tandem in order for a well to be located that close to the property line, which I couldn't tell you how likely that would be or not. It would probably come down to him subdividing the property as well, which is there'd be a lot of findings that would go into that before we even got to that point. He said he was going to provide a written comment, and we did not receive that prior to the hearing today, so we don't have that. We did have one additional written comment that I provided to you come in this morning. This is from Bruce Allen, a resident on Forest Hill Lane. So this is back from B&M Zoo subdivision a little ways. He needs to utilize Blue Mountain Road to get there, though, and that is addressing traffic concerns on the road. That, like I said, that comment's provided to you. If you have questions about that, we can dive into some of the details, or he may be here with us today as well. With that, we've heard what planning board's recommended. Staff is also recommending that both of these motions be approved. There weren't an incredible amount of changes to the recommended conditions from planning board, so staff feels that it's fairly well written the way it's turned out. That concludes my staff report. If you have any additional questions, I'm here to answer them.
Okay. Thank you, Casey, for your very thorough staff report. Would either the applicant or the applicant's representative like to present to us?
I'll start. Paul Forsting, Territorial Landworks. Casey's got a PowerPoint of mine for me, and I think I need to get a mouse. Maybe.
Yeah, you take that.
All right. Thanks, Casey. So I just tried to add some pictures. Casey did a great job, both in the staff report and with his presentation. So he leaves not many stones unturned, so to speak. But I've got a lot of pictures here. We appreciate the approval in the staff report, and we're proud of the planning board approval that we received, and in general, the agency comments that we received also. Well, they don't support the project, so to speak. It'd be nice if we got support letters or whatnot, but they certainly don't point out anything in specific that that we're deficient in. So that's good. That's the opposite of a negative comment, I think. So I'll just start from the beginning here. And like I said, I just have some pictures here. I've worked on the site for quite a while for various different aspects of the development out here, from what Peak's been doing to what Gene wants to do here. And something that, always struck me is kind of, you never really think of the site being as high up as it is, but it kind of is. So this is a view from the going north on Blue Mountain Road from the intersection of Highway 93. And you can't see the property yet here. You can see Peak and their I guess, main building there. I get a little antsy. All right. Okay. And then this is the Peak building here. Our property is located over here, behind it, up above it, and you can hardly see it here. This is their racket facility, a building that they put in, maybe 8-9 years ago. It was put in at the same time as the sewer system was installed, and the same time as Watson's Children's Center was installed. And so here's a picture of Watson's, and you can actually see from here, we can look at our sewer systems back here. And then this again is our site from up above. Here's back on Blue Mountain Road. Here's you still can't really see our property yet, but the road keeps climbing, and then we get here, and this is where our property resides. We're right adjacent to the back of that racket facility there. You can actually hear tennis balls hitting off on there sometimes if you listen closely, and you can kind of see what's going on with the site. We've gained quite a bit of elevation because they're kind of dug into the ground there. Their building is. You can see some of Gene's equipment out here and some miscellaneous pieces of equipment and some miscellaneous kind of piles of different materials. And this is a view from the absolute opposite side of the property. We've got a house here. Oh, do not know why that does that. Here's a house here. Looks like they've done some burning of the adjacent weeds or whatever, not to disrupt their lawn. And you can see across it, you can see some, again, the piles and a different view of them, but it is a pretty big site. I think it's 13 and a half acres, if I'm remembering right. You look at this and see what a beautiful spot it is. I think it's great. It's a great location for many reasons. One is that I think people are really going to enjoy living up here. It's a site right next to the gym and these other facilities here. I could imagine, somebody who's going to live here is going to probably frequent there. They'll be nice for that aspect. I think it's also nice for the kids at Watson's. They've got a gym next to them, and they've got some commercial buildings, and there's a couple houses scattered out but this will put a neighborhood out there to kind of maybe normalize the area a little bit, put some houses there. This is the wastewater system. As Casey said, it's a sequencing batch reactor. It does an excellent job with treatment. It's all, these are all, what you're looking at is a building with the computer in there and some tanks. Inside of there, some kind of chemicals are in there, and then you're looking at all these underground tanks. They're all connected with pumps, and there's currently 3 of the 4 pods that are there in use. One pod is made available for extra use, and that was installed by Gene here. Gene Mostad worked with Peak and Watson's to come up with a solution for the wastewater out here. Gene helped install this system, and he oversized it with the hope of being able to get approval to subdivide this upper area. So it was built with extra capacity with the very hope of being able to get approval of a subdivision up here, and that's, we're at a very important step in that process right here. So this is what the wastewater facility looks like. As Casey mentioned, there is a drain field in it. It's located right in between the Peak main building and the racket facility. There's a big green space there, and that's where the primary drain field is today. That'll service the first phase of this development. The second phase of this development will install its own drain field on the site. But there is capacity in the system and in that drain field for additional flow. I brought a couple sample results here just so you can see kind of what a high power system this is. This is a sample result that we submit to the state. This is from the dose tank, and it just shows what kind of treatment we've received from Energy Labs. And so what I look at here is, well, this was from September, our last result that I could find. And it had 3.2 milligrams per liter of total nitrogen. For reference, a standard septic system is expected to do about 50 milligrams per liter. Some of the more advanced nitrogen removing systems, we call them level 2 systems, like Sand Mound ones we've got at Tura. We're going to install one at the Spurgeon Ranch subdivision from Eliminite. Those will do in the 20 milligrams per liter. They're expected to be below 24 parts. And this one does really good. In the summer, we can get down to 0. And because of that, we've seen some really positive results in the groundwater. And so what we see here, and I hope you commissioners can see it on your screen there, is a comparison of the monitoring well results that we had right when the system was online. And then we see the most recent results. And what I'm looking at here, unfortunately, I don't have a total nitrogen line item here. It's just probably because at that time we didn't ask for it. But what you can use is nitrogen, which is a combination of nitrite plus nitrate. And we have 18.4 milligrams per liter that was found in there, largely probably due to the old sewer system that Peak was on. And today, when we look at it, the most recent results here I have, again, I think from September, if I can read those right. We have non-detect in total nitrogen, and this nitrite plus nitrate, to compare to what we have over here, it's very, very low at 0.03. And if you combine all these, they don't even show up as a total nitrogen incident. So we've seen really, really positive results in the groundwater from this system. It does great. And so we're really proud of that. Here's a picture of that bench that Casey mentioned. This is kind of the top of the slope. Everything that starts to drop off here will be in a no build zone. Our houses, we have 3 on this bench, all will be in line with the existing houses. And we have 1 here, and it'll be really right in line. Here's another picture looking north. You can see somebody brought up during the, I think, neighborhood meeting or while we were out there that this was an old radio building. Somebody used to sit in this and kind of disc jockey or do some kind of interesting stuff here. We've got some radio towers over here too. So again, I just brought up the same picture that Casey had showed us here. Our 3 houses are generally in line with this house and this house here. And everything else here is to be protected other than the utilities. Here is our common area that Casey had also shown. We think it does have it can be used for park. It's got a trail connecting our existing our proposed trails through it. We are putting our utilities in there. We have some storm drainage areas, but we also, for instance, this area here is all going to be flat. A drain field's got to be flat. If you look at Peak's drain field, it's a grassy, field there. That's flat. The replacement area won't be disturbed either. And so we've got a big chunk of flat area here. This upper area will be flat here. We have the sewer system, so we find it's a good combined area, and it meets what we think the definition of passive recreation should fall under. As we mentioned before, but we've got a large area here. We will put the idea is that we'd have a berm there, and it allows Gene some control with what the landscaping will be on the site. I did bring a couple pictures of some things that Gene's has done in the past. This is the River Pines subdivision. And if it's right at the location is off Blue Mountain Road and River Pines Road, which is right by O'Brien Creek Road. And if you're familiar with the area, you may have seen it. And this isn't the best picture, but what you'll see here is River Pine Roads, and here's the controlled entry. This is a park area that Gene's got here. And with this common area, as we're proposing it, it keeps the individuals from owning that property right against the road. And if they did own it, they might put this shed that they have on their property out here somewhere. And so he feels it's a better version of kind of how homes will be laid out, allows him to have some control. We do have some water restrictions in the area, and so we're hoping to do some xeriscaping, and it's just good that Gene has control over those areas. And so here's River Pines, and then here's a version of a berm that Gene mentioned he worked on. It's Brookside. It's in the Rattlesnake. You can see this is a berm with landscaping around it here. And it provides a nice kind of buffer area to the homes inside the Brookside development. And here's another view of it. And again, you can hardly see this house in here, and they've done different landscaping here around it. And Gene has the goal of doing some different landscaping that's drought resistant around his berm to provide a similar buffer off of Blue Mountain Road. So that's the end of the slides I had here today. I thought I had one on the phasing plan, but I did want to make a comment about the phasing plan. we're here today and we're hoping to have approval of this subdivision. As part of that, we're hoping to move forward with phase one of this subdivision. And there's been recent rule changes at the state which have kind of discussed how phased subdivisions can be processed and whatnot, and we understand those rules. But it's my understanding that the planning office interprets those rules to say that we have to come back to you to file our intention to do phase one. And as part of that, you'll re-review us for our impacts and whatnot. It's kind of an interesting new nuance. You'll probably be seeing a lot of phased subdivisions in front of you because of that. If that's the way it has to be, then I'm hoping in the amendment process, we can make some provision to say, hey, if somebody comes for an approval, maybe within the first 2 years or something, they can go file that first phase. I can certainly understand a subdivision that's been phased and hasn't been worked on for 10 years. And then you come back and say, okay, well, my assumption is they thought they were going to do it, but a lot of things may have changed since then. But for when we're here today with our phase project, we want to get going on it. I know Gene's excited to get moving on it, and you may in fact see us again if you approve it to reapprove this first phase. So anyhow, thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, this is a public hearing, which I'll go ahead and open. Is there any public comment on the proposed B&M Zoo subdivision? And if you could state your name for the record, sir.
My name is Bob Massey. I live at 4585 Tiberius Drive. That's property just adjacent to and on the north west corner of the subdivision. I'm here with a couple hats. One is I want to speak in favor of the subdivision. I think it's going to be a vast improvement to the area. That area has been a waste area for 20-some years. It's been nothing but a problem for us out there with weeds. As you saw in one of those slides, one of the neighbors tried to burn some of the weeds because in the fall, the weeds come across from the wind comes out of the southwest. It piles up weeds on fences and yards in our area to the north, sometimes 3 and 4 and 5 feet high. So it does need to be developed. There's no question about that. In terms of the future of the area out there, I don't know if there's any money left in the bond. The Parks and Rec got approved here 2, 3, 4 years ago, but there's a real need for a bike path walkway from Highway 93 to the Blue Mountain Recreation Area, which is only a quarter mile north and a quarter mile west of this of the intersection where the existing new bike path is now on Highway 93. That needs to be put into somebody's plan in the very near future. A lot of risk in people running, walking dogs, biking on Blue Mountain Road. So I want to make sure that is something that I think the commissioners and the county ought to look into in the very near future and have a plan to solve that problem before somebody gets killed on that road. In terms of questions, and I have to apologize because through some unfortunate circumstances, I wasn't able to make the planning board hearing, so I didn't get to voice a couple of concerns. But one of them is the issue of the phase 1 and phase 2. I wasn't aware of that, and in the information I got, either I didn't read it diligently enough or I just didn't pick up on it or it wasn't there. My concern with the phase 2 area is what happens to that area during the next 2 or 3 years when you're in the plan of doing phase 1 and you haven't done that area. Because that's where a lot of the weed growth is. There's some unsightly areas in that area. And I'd like to also know if that berm that goes to the north and west is going to be completed as part of the phase 1 development. So that's a concern.
The
phase picture?
Yeah, if you can see that berm that extends up Blue Mountain Road, and then it hits the corner and turns north and then goes east after that. That section there to the north and west of the purple area that's in phase 2, I'm just wondering if that gets developed in phase 1 or if that's left to grow weeds and whatever.
So it looks like it's part of phase 1, right? The berm, all the way around.
It looks like heads are nodding. That's a yes.
The green is phase 1.
Yeah, that's great. Appreciate that. And that purple area hopefully will be, taken care of in terms of weeds and other things. It can be mowed real easily. That just hasn't been done in that area for 23 years that I've been there. The only other question I have is regarding wells. And of course, water's an issue in that area because wells are not very productive. Some wells are up to 400 feet deep up there. And at one of the earlier meetings on the site, I know one of the neighbors asked, I think, the developer a question regarding wells and what happens if there's a drawdown. I know there's some wells that are 2 and 3 and 4 gallon a minute there. If they're drawn down to 50% of that flow, they're not adequate for housing. And I think there was a comment made. I don't know if it's something that can be accomplished or not, but I think the comment was, there's only a couple solutions. One is you deepen the well, and who pays the cost of the increased depth of the well, and the other would be a potential to hook up to that existing new water system that is being provided for these users here. So those are my questions, and I just wanted to get them of record.
Thank you. And could you spell your last name?
It's Massey.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Massey.
Thank you.
Is there any additional public comment? Come on up.
My name's Eric Anderson. Excuse me. You know we're cold. I live at 4700 Warnath. It's about 1,000 feet away to the south and west of this subdivision, so pretty close. And I submitted some concerns via written comment, and I attended the planning board meeting. And so I think my general concerns are known, and I'll go over them sort of briefly. And then I've got sort of a remaining concern about the conditions that are being proposed. I guess in general, overall, I think this is a good place for a subdivision. I don't see any real issues with the layout or the location. However, I have some concerns about water usage of the subdivision because it is a large number of lots being put on an exempt well for the limit of the 10 acre feet per year. And I think that the conditions are good that the planning board came up with and that the planning staff came up with, but I think there's a couple of holes in them, and I think that there's still a possibility that water overuse could occur above and beyond the 10 acre feet. And because there's really no concrete evidence about how the groundwater works out there, we don't really know if that is going to cause an issue or not. Really the only thing we know is that there are some problem wells in the area. I know a couple of my neighbors have real issues with irrigation, and they either can't do it or they can only do it for short periods of time. And then we're also really close to the Hayes Creek groundwater control area, which is probably only about 3,000, 4,000 feet away to the southwest. And our house and our neighborhood sits right in between there and the subdivision. So that's kind of all that's known. And so there are obviously some issues in the area. And so that's where my concern lie, that we don't want to, this subdivision to potentially start drying up wells in the area. So a couple of things that the conditions to report to DNRC I think are good, and to report to CAPS annually I think are good. And then there's another condition that was added during the planning board meeting to basically notify the owners of the volume restriction. My concern, I guess, is that there's really nothing unique being proposed about how to reduce the water usage in the subdivision. And as noted in the DNRC letter to the applicant, basically, they are using less water, or proposing to use less water than they could use if they irrigated everything on the subdivision. They would exceed the 10 acre feet. And in the DNRC letter, they also noted that, they agreed with the calculations that were being presented. However, they noted that they are reduced from, the maximum potential, and that they were assuming that some kind of restrictions were going to be put in place during the subdivision process, which we're going through now. So I think that, that we're notifying the landowners here of the 10 acre feet, but we're not saying, how how much each landowner may get. We're not really breaking it down for them. I don't know how useful that condition really is, and it really doesn't, to me, it doesn't have much teeth. So I think that what could happen is that, you build out this subdivision, you have the first few lots go in, and they could, really legally use up all the water in the subdivision, and then all of a sudden you start reporting to DNRC and you exceed the 10 acre feet, and then the rest of the lots may not have anything, may not have any water available to them. So, that's an issue. I don't know how you would solve that if that were to happen. So, in general, that's my concern. I think I like the conditions. I don't know if they're perfect, and I really, I don't know if there's a perfect solution. I guess I was kind of hoping that some kind of unique conditions would be offered by the applicant to about maybe landscaping or about individualizing the water use for the lots to sort of divvy things out a little bit more and let landowners know, you've got this much water and that equates to potentially this much irrigated area on your lot because it's quite a bit less than the total available irrigated area on each lot. And that's really my basic concerns. Appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you. Any additional public comment? Okay, I'll close the public hearing. Questions, discussion among the commission? Commissioner Curtis.
Sure, I think that it would be good for Mr. Mosted or Mr. Forsting to just state on the record what they plan to do to help with that monitoring. In other words, are you going to have meters? Are you going to have landscape types that you recommend? And then just talk a little bit more about the question Mr. Massey asked, well, Mr. Anderson too, about the effect those two wells could have on the neighboring wells.
Paul Forsting, Territorial Landworks. Yeah, and so we've, Eric brought up a lot of good points, and we discussed it quite a bit at the planning board. And maybe, and maybe just talk about what, we've submitted a preliminary report to the DNRC to talk about how we're going to stay within that water right. And as part of our discussion, we said, hey, we're going to use the standard amount for domestic use. We're going to use 250 gallons a day. We're going to assume that's gone. Everybody who's going to use this well is going to use the standard amount of water inside their house. Where we're going to be more prudent is outside of the house. And so with our calculations, we said, okay, we've got a 3.37 acre common area, and we've got 1 acre of that we can irrigate in a standard irrigating practice. And then each house can irrigate up to 3,600 feet. And there's a couple more feet on that, but that's what each person gets today with the current calculations. There's different ways of staying under that amount. We've talked about xeriscaping, and I think that's what Genes intends to do with a lot of the common area. So it's still attractive, but doesn't require much water. There's drip irrigation and things that use a lot less water. So we don't use it up, and we can use that 1 acre that we have in the common area pretty diligently. And then for the homeowners, I think, 3,600 feet isn't a ton. You're not going to get to irrigate your whole quarter acre or half acre parcel, and some of them. But that's not unusual for the area. These are some of these properties, and if you looked at kind of the area where the bench was, you'll see the person owns all the way down to the ditch, but they fenced off the upper area and and then they left the area to the ditch to be unirrigated, and so a lot of those properties won't be irrigated. I guess kind of the bigger question is availability of water. We put our wells are on the lower bench, and if you look at this area, that's where all the high producing wells are. There's a distinct difference from all the wells that are located on the upper bench. And some of those have really, really low producing wells, and they have to go really deep to find them. That is not the case for the well the 2 wells we installed. Those were tested by a hydrogeologist, and they pumped for a couple days at 60 plus gallons per minute, and were able to handle an instantaneous flow of 80 gallons per minute. That's a lot of water, and a lot different than somebody who's getting 3 gallons per minute water and has some different situations there. Regarding the DNRC water rights, well, that's everybody in the area's got an exempt water right, and they're all held to the same standard. There was one instance that Casey had brought up, that I was aware of also, that the DNRC brought up, was the house on the kind of over by the Blue Mountain Road trailhead. That bigger house, they had water canyons, they were using excessive amounts of water outside, and the DNRC did regulate that, then they did stop using them. And so how that wraps in back to us? Well, there's enough water for everybody to have in their house. If we did exceed the amount of water that we're going to use, we would have to pull back on irrigation. Certainly the first obvious spot to do that would be in the common areas, because that would be the easiest spot. And then if we're still exceeding it, then individuals will have to be restricted, which they will be from the start, but I'm talking about the scenario where we did exceed it. There's a condition that says we have to submit our annual water usage to the DNRC and to CAPS, and those numbers will have to show that we're staying under our annual requirement or allotment of 10 acre feet.
So Paul, will there be meters on individual homes or properties? Or, because conceivably you could have some water hog out there that plants the whole parcel in Kentucky bluegrass and runs the sprinklers 24/7.
Right. No, there'll be, as proposed, there's 1 meter, and that will show that we're staying as a total under it. But if there's a water hog, he'll be easy to see. And although this condition, may not meet exactly what Eric thinks it should have to say, it's left vague enough because we don't know exactly who's going to get much water, but it will say how much each individual lot gets. We just need to work out how much we're going to use. We might use less than that acre in the common area and say you get 5,000 or the calculation isn't set yet for each individual house, but this will ultimately say how much you get. It'll be a community enforcement thing, and we feel we'll stay below it. We also have kind of, as the planning board put it, a belt and suspenders situation here where we've got 11 houses coming, 11 houses coming, 11 lots, one of those being Watson's in the first phase. We're going to build those, and then we have to come back to you, as I discussed at the end of my presentation, and presumably with several years of our water usage, and say, okay, we're going to add 8 more houses. Here's what we've used for our first 10 that are using the well. And, it'll be relatively easy math that can be calculated, saying that you got to do something different. These folks will get no irrigation on these 10 lots. All those lots will be owned by Gene still in that case. And so there will be a really, there's a built-in phase where we'll be back in front of you commissioners before we're built out. And we certainly wouldn't want to come and say we're using all of our water then, and then you'd probably be in a position to say, well, you can't do anything, and maybe come back when you have shown us a reduction here. And so there is a kind of, as the planning board put it, a belt and suspenders approach here. So,
Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, Commissioner Curtis. Tim? Oh,
Yep, Tim, I just wanted to have you talk to us on I know this phase thing came from, a subdivision that ended up in court. But do they really have to come back in before phase 1 if they do it within the 3 years?
To my understanding, I think this is 76-3-617. I don't know that there's any exceptions to individual phases having to come in. I think each phase has to come in. I could investigate with the author of that bill. I don't know if that's going to help us today, but my assumption is that maybe John knows
Does it
more
have
about
to have
this.
a hearing like this, or it just needs to be blessed like in an administrative meeting?
I think it has to be a hearing like this, and it's more if there's changes in findings of fact. Are there any changes on the ground that would require new conditions of approval, for instance?
And
I
do
think
we
that's.
charge a fee for that?
We don't have it on our fee schedule. We could.
No, I didn't want to. That wasn't what I was looking at. I was just wondering. It seems like on phase 1, it's kind of unnecessary, but if
It does
that's what
seem a
we're,
little
our hands
duplicative
are
if
kinda
if it's a quick turnaround.
John, did you have some insight?
I think Tim's is right, and Paul had alluded to this earlier, that if the period of time that's gone by between this hearing and when they want to do phase 1, it's going to be a fairly cursory review, and the review will only evaluate whether there's new information or significant changes in circumstances that have transpired, and that there's an exceptional reason to revisit the primary criteria. And Commissioner Curtis,
the statute does allow the local governing body to charge a fee for review of each one of those phases.
I don't think we should do phase one anyway.
Great, thanks. Paul, I've got a couple questions for you. I guess first to, and it looks like he's left, but one of Mr. Massey's questions related to weed control on phase two. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, well, the commissioners have a standard requirement for all subdivisions, and this one's subject to it, where we have a pretty extensive weed management plan there. And so it'll be very specific on what we have to do with these phases, because that has been a problem in the county, and the commissioners have addressed it, maybe 5-10 years ago. And so there's a pretty voluminous document that we put that says phase two will absolutely be a weed management priority for the landowner and the HOA.
Okay, thanks. Second, so up until this point, has Watson's Children's Shelter been a lessee, or since they're being severed off as their own lot, how is that?
Well, maybe Gene can discuss that a little better, but essentially they're on Gene's property.
Mr. Mosad?
Yeah, Gene Mosted, they have been a percentage owner of the whole when we did it. That way, and so we sold them a percentage of the property at the time.
Okay, thank you. Cola?
Casey, could you pull up our subdivision regulations to section 3.10.7? I'm interested in that they have to meet at least one of the design standards, and if I recall, there are several, and I just want to take a look at that condition of cash in lieu of parkland and open space. And Lisa sent this to us, and I didn't print it, so.
I did, but I left it on
Yeah.
the desk.
And I guess numbers 4 and 5, I kind of see the trail around the common area in the back satisfying both of those conditions. Not conditions, standards, and you only have to meet one. Is there more after 7? And then, and
Really goes to 8 there.
and then 8 kind of leaves it open to a design that makes sense. And I don't know if, Gene, you want to address this a little bit, but you've said before, that this is really a smarter design, and it's a better design than maybe you would get otherwise. And it does have a trail, and it does have a trail around common area, and the acreage is 3 times larger than what we require in acreage. So I'm not sure if I'm completely convinced that they don't meet the standards. If anyone here wants to speak to that, for and against.
Gene, come on up, then maybe it'd be good to hear from Garrick, who I think might have some insight.
Well, like the pictures on the berms and stuff that we showed you, and keeping houses and backyards and sheds from main roads and stuff, and having the buffer zones in the berms, to me is a better design in the overall of the subdivision, and having interior parks for the residents of the subdivision. I'm not the people that usually live inside of the subdivisions that we've built before aren't usually interested in the public coming to their parks. A lot of times the city wants to design, have us design parks so that the public can come to their parks. Well, they don't like the public coming to their parks a lot of the times because the public doesn't take care of the parks inside their subdivisions. When we have parks that are more public, big parks, I think that's a totally different deal. But when we have these smaller parks that people really see more as their individual park within their living space,
they take offense to it when people come there and don't take care of it. So having an interior park that they kind of figure as their gathering place, and then to have these berms and stuff that I've done before have become, people really like them, and it creates that buffer and a little bit more of a privacy thing. So when I look for subdivisions, when I'm doing them, I look for ways to do that. And this one was another classical one, kind of like the front of Brookside and the River Pines one. I mean, I did those things very deliberately.
Thank you. Garrett, could you come on up? And I think part of the question is in this section 3.10.7.8, it says other parks, open space or common area designs which meet the intent of this section and meet the goals of adopted neighborhood parks and open space and area plans. So part of the operative phrasing there is meeting the intent of these goals and other plans. So feel free to elaborate.
Yeah, I'm Garrick Swanson, their landscape designer and planner for Parks, Trails, and
You might need to get a little closer to the mic there.
Garrick Swanson with Parks, Trails, and Open
Thank
Lands. So I just want to address first is that a common area that runs around the perimeter. I understand what Mr. Mostad is trying to design and develop there. He's trying to design a setback in there, but that parcel doesn't add a usable space to the public. In managing parks, these areas have a tendency to become dumping grounds for yard waste or other unwanted material by the homeowner because they have limited access and they are hidden. So in terms of meeting the park design standards, it doesn't provide that level of access even to the resident. It's more of a buffer and less as a common space. And then looking at the proposed central gathering area, that's 0.8 acres. I know looking at 3.10.7.4 active recreation, it reads a site for active recreation on slopes which average 3% or less. Grade standards will vary depending on the use proposed. Well, a large portion of that site also is designed to handle stormwater management, which further reduces the beneficial use of that site. And then to be able to access the site, you have to cross that stormwater drainage easement even to get to the usable space there. In there, and then in addition, when you have a central gathering space, if lots 13, 12, 11, and 10 put up a privacy fence there, you enclose that space, and that is a hidden space that has a tendency to provide opportunities for undesirable behavior. When I look at any subdivision proposed common area parkland, I also look at the crime prevention through environmental design standards in there.
Although we haven't adopted any regulations
No,
about SEPTID.
I look at those just to see how they will function in there. So, and then within this area in the 2004 City County Master Park and Recreation Plan, this area is identified in need of a neighborhood park, but due to the size of the subdivision, there is not enough space to meet park design standards within there. So as a result, because we can't meet those standards, we are asking for cash in lieu of parkland.
So one idea that occurred to me this morning, I don't know if it was while I was getting the kids out the door to the bus or not, but anyway, so we have a no-build zone on kind of the north side of the subdivision. If that were considered to be dedicated parkland, would that, how would that play out in your estimation, Garrick? Would that satisfy our parkland dedication requirement?
My concern with that is there is no level of access. There's no level of public access for the residents.
Although could 3.10.7.6 be seen as being partially satisfied by this, even if there's no access, it's preserving the hillside in some sense?
As well as 7.3, that's, preserving, it's not a stream, it's an irrigation ditch, but kind of the riparian and the wildlife habitat that occurs down by the irrigation ditch.
Right. So there's natural amenities being preserved, which seems to lend itself to meeting the intent of these regulations, even if there is no direct access.
In looking and trying to answer that question, I would ask the Board of Commission to also consider, is that slope a natural feature, or is it a artificial slope that has developed over the course of years of dumping there and or grading? So are we truly meeting that preservation of a natural feature?
Well, from the pictures from 1955, it looked like it was there. I think it's just a natural bench. The dumping has been more of stockpiling of dirt that's happened up on the top from the years that I've watched it anyway. Because I think that, well, for one thing, we're protecting that area down below there's a no-build zone for wildlife. But if you look at the common area as proposed, and I don't know why it doesn't seem to me to be an area that would draw in crime, even if somebody put up a fence, I don't know, just the layout doesn't seem to feel that way to me. It's 0.6 acres, so it's pretty close to the 0.87 that's required, even if you only counted it. The berms around the edge, I wouldn't say necessarily count. I think they definitely enhance. They're not, but they are common areas. I mean, not all common areas get developed, so.
Cola.
Yeah, I guess I just feel that you only have to meet one of these, and you could argue that it meets several of them in one way or another, and so I'm not just not convinced that it doesn't meet those design standards. And also, I appreciate that developers try to be creative and make designs better. I happen to live in a subdivision that has a big open lot set aside for parkland, and it's hideous. I'd rather have a house on it. Nobody uses it. It's completely, there's really no purpose for it. And I'd rather see someone meet the standards, but have a creative approach to it and have usable space that's beautiful and that people utilize. And I'd rather see that than your traditional set-aside lot.
So another question, assuming that cash in lieu was paid, since a number of folks, I think the county included, has identified the need for a trail along Blue Mountain Road as being a priority, how might cash in lieu funds be reserved for a potential trail at some future time?
Cash in lieu funds are typically put into our matching grant fund to help offset costs for community initiated projects within the area that the money comes from.
Right, in the area. And so I think that there are three people sitting right here that have the power to say, and this will be put in a fund. I talked to Greg about that this morning, just in what that trail will cost, and he said like $150,000 is what he thinks. It's not a huge cost trail because it's pretty flat in the right-of-ways there. So I think if we were going to collect cash in lieu, I'd want to definitely put it toward being set aside for that purpose. And as Mr. Massey said, it's been on all of our lists as something to do for a while, but it hasn't come to fruition quite yet.
So
Go ahead, Garrick.
In two just closing statements. Public Works has completed what I could probably say a 95% level CD set for this section of trail. And as Mr. Macy also concluded, there is the Parks and Trails bond money for trails that could also help offset that. Could help offset that cost. And in terms of your question, Commissioner Kola, and preservation of that hillside could be considered meeting parkland dedication requirements. I'll leave that up to the commissioners to decide on. But whether cash in lieu is provided and or not, it does not change the current layout of the site plan. And then by not providing cash in lieu, it would be a loss to the Parks and Trails and Open Lands program, whether that money went towards future parks or went towards to fund a portion of the trail.
Thank you.
Just one more thing in
go
regard
ahead,
to the
go ahead.
stormwater. My grandkids live in a neighborhood that has a few swale areas that are pretty good size, like there's some that are bigger than this room, that are for stormwater, but on those days, they get to play like ducks, but most of the time it's dry and kids play there all the time. It's where we went sledding on Christmas morning, so just because there was enough of a slope. So they can be used in other ways.
I
One
guess
other
the
thing-
flip,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, the flip side there, and hopefully this isn't one of your subdivisions, Mr. Mostad, but I have noticed one out west of Reserve, and there's, maybe it's even one I approved back in the day, but there is a stormwater catchment area that I don't know if it was counted as parkland dedication or not, but it's clearly by virtue of topography and the fact that it's catching stormwater is not all that desirable of a space to use. So
One other thing I think that we should put on the record, because CFAC did come out against this, and there was some talk about ag land. So I'd just like to talk about the things that I'm weighing in looking at those comments. For one, this area is zoned, and the zoning district, I think, was quite creative in the fact that they created a section of their zoning district designated for ag, the one that made the most sense and had the water rights. And then it has the one section for residential and has a section for commercial. And as folks, just the couple folks that spoke today said, the groundwater in the area is limited except down on that lower bench. So while the soil, if irrigated, makes sense, this particular space and the availability of groundwater and the availability of ag water from the ditch is not on this property. So therefore, to me, it doesn't make sense to consider their comments as valid in this case.
yeah, I would concur. I'm a strong supporter of doing what we can to preserve our limited soil resource in the Missoula Valley. In this case, there are no agricultural water facilities. Clearly from the historic imagery, no historic ag use on the site. Zoning, as near as I can tell from reading the zoning regulations here, precludes agricultural operations unless it is currently existing, which would kind of be grandfathered in if I'm reading correctly. So all of those things told lend itself to this being a residential use parcel.
Ditto. As far as I think that the zoning made a lot of sense. It was thoughtful. It set aside land for ag when it was zoned, kind of a larger picture view of just setting aside when we do a subdivision, but really looking at an area and picking out where the best ag land is. And then also it was mentioned in the planning board that there's only 6 inches of topsoil, and so that Mr. Mostad, I believe, said that they haven't been able to ever grow any crops on it because although it's prime if irrigated, there's only 6 inches of it, and it's not actually usable as ag land, which is why it has never been. And I don't know, we haven't done drilling to check if that's true or anything, but it sounds like the soil is not that usable for ag land, and it certainly isn't if there's no water. So, but I do appreciate CFAC taking the time to comment.
There was one other comment that I think came up in the planning board deliberations related to wildfire risk. And I took a run up there the other day and looked at the site, and I think I would concur with the evaluation of fire risk, I think being in a low category for this particular site. Although maybe I'll have to rethink that, seeing the blackened zone in the photo. Thanks for showing that. But no, I think that's probably an accurate assessment, and yeah, I'll leave it at that. Other questions, discussion, motions?
I guess I'd just throw out one more idea is, I don't know that we do this very often, but could we give credit for half a park and half cash in lieu? I mean, the park's not quite big enough. But you do have the land that's over by the, where the drain field will go to that could count, so I guess you could easily make it.
Paul, come.
Not too much to add, but it was something I did want to bring up. The regulations appear to allow either a waiver, the commission can approve a waiver to say that you don't have to do cash in lieu. That's of course what Gene and I would prefer, but right next to it, it talks about a combination, which I think hits what Gene was amounting to.
Casey's head is nodding. So,
Actually, I'm on the regulations here, so I'll just scroll up to it. So 3.10.5.2 B would be that combination aspect.
and what again is the total cash, or we don't know that yet?
It'd be based on an appraised value of the land.
I mean, any ballpark?
So cash in lieu is a really difficult thing because sometimes the appraisal amount, what we pay the appraiser to do the cash in lieu calculation is more than what the county gets. And so it's a really, I was just meeting with my peers and sometimes those cost $5,000 just because it's an irregular appraisal to do. They don't go around appraising parkland. And so as a side note, if there's some way we could get a standard formula for that as a county, more money could be going into the county for improvements to parks. So it's a difficult pill to swallow when we go to do those appraisals. I'd estimate, somewhere and Garrick may know, $5,000 something. They're relatively low what land is worth from a park standpoint. Everything's based on a developable rate. And so I guess, we're probably looking at $10,000 in cash in lieu with the appraisal and whatever we end up paying. That's just a guess though.
Thank you.
And when you do the combination, it's a proportional amount of value in the land not covered by the land dedication. And here, if you count that middle area and the drain field areas, they meet the acreage. And so what proportion would we be using that they're not hitting with the land? So I guess I just would move that we strike condition 17 that requires the cash in lieu of parkland.
19, I think.
It's on page,
The-
on this copy, it's,
The condition numbers changed with the planning board recommendation because they inserted condition 16.
Oh, is it
so-
the one that says attachment 1 is the one I have that says 19, but anyway, we can
the
just say
parks and open space condition, the only
Okay.
one under parks and open space, whatever number that is on different versions.
It'd be 19
Okay.
on the planning board recommendations.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would second that. I understand that we need a park in the area. I think this is a nice addition to the area. Folks can, as soon as we get the trail done, safely walk to the Blue Mountain Recreation Area. I don't know. I just think that the subdivision design is fine. It's going to offer there's room for a volleyball net or a croquet set or a little kids softball game going on a half an acre. So I'm okay with not doing the cash in lieu in this case.
And while I appreciate the design and that I think it absolutely enhances the subdivision, I'm not sure that I'm quite ready to see this as meeting the intent of the regulations. So we've had a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No. Carries. Okay. Casey, do you need to bring up the specific motions onto the screen here for us?
All right. I would move that the request to vary from road widening requirements for Blue Mountain Road in subreg section 3.4.4 be approved based on the findings of fact in the staff report and public testimony.
Second.
Any additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And I move that the B&M Zoo subdivision be approved based on the findings of fact in the staff report and public testimony, subject to the amended conditions approval and the revision that we made today.
Second.
Any additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
That passes. And I should say, the irony did not escape me today that this thick report, with all of the work that went into that compared to the, for all intents and purposes, major subdivision that we approved earlier with the family transfer is quite a contrast. But a lot of work went into this, so thanks for that. And
And can you reuse these?
Yeah, I'll take whatever, we
There you go.
recycle it all if you give it to me, so.
Oh, you want the whole bag?
If you don't want it,
Nope, they just end up.
Yeah, you can have it.
okay, is there any other business?
I wanted to thank you too. This was an interesting subdivision with a lot of issues really that you guys addressed and creatively and came forward with a really solid proposal, I think. So thanks for all your work.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no other business, we will be in recess.
Thank you.
Thank you.